Okay, all yours.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along, or not coming along, or being there. So this evening we've got someone that everybody, well, lots of people know. It's the lovely Becki Hadley, who's now Dr. Becki Hadley, because she's had her Viva for her PhD. So that's brilliant. And she used to help with the dancing class and do a research on dancing with Parkinsons. And now she's working with dementia. Is that right, Becki? Yes?
Yes. Yeah.
So she's going to talk this evening about dementia, and since she knows far more about it than I do, I'm going to hand straight over to Becki. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much. Oh, can everyone hear me? Or
yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. So thank you so much for having me to talk to you all. It's really appreciated. And though I could be anywhere in the world, unfortunately, I'm not coming from anywhere exotic, so just North London. So let me share my screen with you, and hopefully this will all work fine, as we tested it earlier. Okay, so can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yep.
Great.
I'm going to go out, come in again.
So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the project that I'm currently working on. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Hertfordshire, and you'll see a lot of other names on the screen as well. They're my colleagues who work as part of the team on a project about, and now this is the really long wordy title that I did not elect to call it, may I add, the contribution of physical activity to social connectivity and wellbeing in older adults living with dementia. Or for short, Physical Activity and Dementia Project, a bit more concise that way. If any of you are particularly tech savvy, then we have a Twitter page where you can follow project updates, but we also just have a general web page that we're going to keep up to date with how the project progresses as well. So yes, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this. So is it not going to let me? Oh, there we go. So how did I kind of become involved in the project, and sort of what made me make the move over from Parkinson's to dementia? Well, as Ruth kind of gave a bit of background, I've been involved with Dance for Parkinson's for quite some time now at the University of Hertfordshire, and was a coordinator of the dance class alongside Ruth, and I think Gillian might be on this Zoom call, and also the lovely Lucy Annette. So we all kind of helped run the dance classes. I've probably been involved with them for about 5 years now. So, and having been involved with those dance classes, I've seen the value of physical activity for people with long-term health conditions. Not just in terms of the physical aspect, but also the psychological. So thinking about social connectivity, building a community. For anyone that attended the dance classes, you'll know that we had staff and students and people with Parkinson's and their partners or family members come along, or friends sometimes as well, to the dance class. So it wasn't just people with Parkinson's, it was kind of a community of people. And so really starting to sort of, that gave me experience of understanding that the importance of physical activity beyond just the physical aspect. So as I say, I'm now working on looking at the role of physical activity in terms of dementia, and this may also include some people living with Parkinson's. So why particularly this study? Well, we know that physical activity is important for also reducing loneliness, which is particularly timely at the minute, given that we are currently living through a pandemic and a lot of people have not been allowed to leave their home and are told to isolate, and so actually and might not be able to be physically active in the way that we perhaps traditionally more think of physical activity. So perhaps going to the gym or taking part in a dance class. So we're really interested with this research project to understand what has been continued during this period of time, whether that's face-to-face. And some, I imagine, like myself, I thought, no, not many people have continued face-to-face things, but there are some examples that we've come across. And and how these activities have been adapted to continue during the pandemic. And we hope to produce some guidelines that are actually feed into giving people the confidence to run and deliver. So this is from the providers of physical activity, but also giving people living with dementia the confidence to do physical activity again. So, and we are working with the Alzheimer's Society. So we have a partner who's a health and sports strategy officer for the Alzheimer's, and they've just won some money through Sport England to do a large project. So we're working together, and our research will feed into theirs to hopefully provide an updated guide on dementia-friendly sport and physical activity. So this funding was actually submitted pre-pandemic, so we've had to kind of shift what we're looking at a little bit. So at the minute we're considering what was on offer, or what people with dementia could do before the pandemic, and now what is happening during the pandemic. So I've talked about dementia friendly activities and dementia friendly. So we also will be looking at dementia friendly communities, and perhaps you might all be familiar with this term, but I just wanted to kind of give a bit more information about that in case you've never heard of what a dementia-friendly community is. So I've put up some examples of the local dementia-friendly communities, and there's no sort of universally agreed definition for this, and they're not necessarily geographically defined. So these ones here that I've got up on the screen, so Watford, Stevenage and Welwyn and Hatfield, are geographically defined, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. And I'm going to call it a DFC for short, but a dementia-friendly community can involve a wide range of people. So this might be organisations, a sort of individuals, so that might be local businesses, for example. And this community recognises that a person with dementia is more than their diagnosis, so that everyone has a role in supporting them to remain independent and included in their local community. And dementia-friendly communities in England can apply for official status through the Alzheimer's Society, and you can work towards kind of different levels. And there's some international frameworks that have been designed for this. And there's about over 300 formally recognised in England, and many more that aren't actually, haven't applied for this formal recognition. So there's quite a few more that don't have this formal status. And so the goal is to kind of increase the confidence of people living with dementia to participate in day-to-day life, and as well as sort of mitigating the effects of cognitive loss. So this is achieved by sort of raising public awareness of what it's like to live with dementia, addressing perhaps barriers to participation in certain activities, and providing support at all stages of the condition. So this might be training local businesses, for example, to become dementia friendly. So perhaps the local Morrison's staff or the Asda staff or whatever your local superstore is might have been trained to be dementia friendly, for example. And our work builds on some previous research by my colleagues. And this was led by Professor Claire Goodman, and she did something called the DEMCOM study. And this was an evaluation of dementia-friendly communities across England. And this is important because there hadn't really been a formal evaluation. So no one knows what a good dementia-friendly community might be. And I say this is important because dementia-friendly communities have been written into public health strategies. So England is actually one of the first countries, David Cameron, when he was in power, wrote it into actual public strategy and policy that we'd have a certain number of dementia-friendly communities by 2020. And it's all very well writing things into public strategy and policy, but you need to be able to evaluate how good that is. What is the cost effectiveness and the value to people living with dementia? Does it actually improve their sort of well-being and quality of life? So this was the sort of the objectives of DEMCOM, was to evaluate dementia-friendly communities. So, and typically they've normally been quite descriptive. So they wanted to answer the sort of what were the characteristics of the different communities, and what are the factors and preconditions needed for positive outcomes for people living with dementia, focusing on cost effectiveness, cost benefit, and addressing gaps in evidence. So they looked at 100 different dementia-friendly communities and 6 case studies, and there is a full report available. And this was funded by the Department of Health and Social Care. And that's all freely accessible. So if anyone wants the link at any point, do let me know, and I can always forward you all that information. So one of the findings of the report, so I'm not going to talk too much about the actual outcomes of the evaluation part, but how it links in with the physical activity aspect, is that some participants really valued engagement in physical activities such as gardening, cycling, walking and football. But there were kind of 2 different types of physical activities. So there's the type that brings people out and into the community. So that might be swimming at your local leisure centre. And these kind of activities are located within mainstream services and have the potential to kind of bridge the experience of living with dementia in everyday life. It kind of provides a sense of continuity for people living with dementia and may help normalise living with the condition. So, and we tend to call these dementia inclusive activities. So, for example, one of our dementia friendly community coordinators took a couple who weren't sure about going swimming because they'd not been to the local leisure centre for some time to the centre to meet the staff. They showed them around, showed them that there were shared facilities. They didn't have to be separated for that period of time, told them when the quiet times were, and familiarised themselves with the environment to kind of boost confidence in being able to go out and take part in swimming. And that's important to take away the stigma of dementia, and also to facilitate people living with dementia being able to take part in activities that everyone else does. So there's those kinds, and then there's also dementia specific activities, and this kind of links to what the Parkinsons dance classes. Some of those are specific to people living with Parkinsons, and some of them might be more open to everybody. And these tend to be separate standalone activities that are kind of safe and valued places, but they tend to have less impact on the wider community sometimes, particularly if they're standalone classes and they involve fewer members of the community. Then perhaps it might not help with addressing stigma, for example. They can be harder to sustain, and I don't know if Ruth agrees with this, but I think we definitely have experienced some challenges with the Dance for Parkinson's classes in the past, that because it's a kind of a smaller, when we didn't have funding for that, that trying to think about how we would do that tends to become a bit more difficult. So there are more challenges with these kind of separate and standalone activities rather than ones that are embedded within these larger mainstream organisations. So DEMCOM didn't focus specifically on physical activity, but there were some findings to suggest that it was important for people living with dementia. And so we hope to follow up on this with our study and specifically focus on dementia and specific and inclusive activities. And so our key objectives, these are things that we hope to produce at the end of the study, is a resource documenting all the different available physical activities for people with dementia in our case study site.
Here's what I found.
Oh, that'll be my what? Siri trying to talk to me. It's always listening. Hopefully it's taking notes. Best practice guidelines for the dementia-friendly communities, and then a report on the benefits of physical activity for people living with dementia. And then we also want to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the provision and accessibility of physical activity. So how do we aim to do all these things, or how are we going to achieve all this? We're going to be surveying all the dementia-friendly communities across England, ideally. So we've been working with the Alzheimer's Society, so typically how communities are structured, ones that are formally recognised, they tend to have like a lead or someone responsible for that. So we hope to survey them, and we've had some responses already about that. We're going to ask them about the types of activities that they offer, what specifically their role is in that. So are they just aware of what goes on in the local community? Say the leisure centre offers a dementia inclusive swimming session, or does the dementia friendly community to specifically deliver their own activities? So do they run a dance class specifically for people living with dementia? Do they promote to other activities? And what resources are needed? We also want to look at, are people living with dementia included in the decision making around what activities are set up and delivered within their community? And that, again, that feeds into that, making sure people living with dementia are a valued part of their community and involved in what is offered for them. We'll then follow up on the surveys with several interviews, and we've done some already, and I'll be talking about some examples in just a minute. And then we've got our case study sites, and some of those are local to us. So we've got Watford and Stevenage as our case study sites, and we will be talking with people living with and affected by dementia from our case study sites. We've also got Sheffield as well, that obviously quite further away, which I really hope to be able to visit there when we first started this project, but obviously that's not going to happen. So everything's having to be online, so that does make things a little bit trickier, because normally what I would do is visit all the different types of activities that we're interested in, but instead we kind of just have to hear about them. So perhaps I don't get to go sort of globe-trotting around England so much to see all these different things or meeting different people, but I still get to talk to people online, so that's something. And then we want to talk to physical activity providers and commissioners to understand what the challenges are around providing activities for people living with dementia, and what kind of processes they go through when they do provide physical activity. So again, do they consult with people living with dementia about what they're doing? Do they gather feedback? And how is that feedback used to then shape their decision making going forward? So I hopefully have kind of given this picture of how we're really putting people living with dementia at the centre for the research. It's really important for us that we understand how the decisions in their communities are made with them in mind. And as I say, we'll be talking to people living with and affected by dementia, so maybe their carers or their family supporters, about the things that they like doing. Why? What are they aware of? Other things that go on in the community? Why do they choose not to participate in those things? To really make it a person-centered piece of research. Is that not moving? Okay, so I wondered if everyone, I can waffle on, but if everyone wants to have a think about maybe what physical activity means to you, because within sports science and psychology, perhaps we have quite a traditional view of what physical activity means. But with this research project, we've kind of had to extend our definition a little bit of what a physical activity is. So you could think about what physical activity maybe meant to you pre-COVID. You might think about what that means to you now. Has it changed during the pandemic, for example? So even just being able to, perhaps some people might have taken up more gardening during this time, and you actually consider that to be a physical activity. So see if any of these on the next slide perhaps came to mind. So these are some of the things when we've run some of our workshops that have come up in conversation. So for us, again, before even really starting on the project, we wanted to understand how best we even define physical activity to shape what kind of things we look at in each of our case study sites. So we had a group of people who have been affected by or living with dementia talk to us about how they define physical activity. So we had, again, this is something that doesn't really happen so much. Well, now that things are opening up, it does, but perhaps not in the last year, is visiting the high street, just having a bit of a mooch around the shops. For some people, that counted as their physical activity because you're getting in a walk at the same time. Another example that came up was going to hobbycraft, because if you knew you were going to get your crafts at the end of it, the walking around the shop, someone said that they could walk around for hours on end, and that was getting there. They're walking in that way. But again, for a sports science definition, that wasn't what we'd necessarily consider to be physical activity. Movement to music, so this kind of fits with the dance aspect, but also what was brought up was that perhaps it doesn't even need to be a dance routine, just popping on some music, particularly within a care home environment. People can just get up and dance as they want to, so it doesn't need to be a structured set dance, but people could just get up and dance as they wish. Crafts as well, and using local green spaces, and grocery shopping. So someone gave a really interesting example of how within their street they'd noticed that people, rather than going out for the one big shop per week to get out of the house, they started going grocery shopping maybe twice, 3 times a week, and splitting out to get out of the house and get moving. So all these different examples. Did any of these come to mind when anyone was thinking of their examples? And walking and talking, reminiscence as well. So again, it's less, I don't know if anyone's heard of the Golden Memories project at Watford Football Club. So they run with their memorabilia from the football club, they run sessions for people living with dementia to reminisce about all the different memorabilia that they have. So reminiscence is a really important activity too, and linked to sport sometimes. So we've had quite a lot of patient and public involvement in this project. We have a dementia involvement group in Stevenage who, again, we talked about what kind of activities they liked doing. That was pre-Christmas. We also have a involvement group through the university, and we meet every month to talk about the project, to ask them to give us feedback on different aspects. So most recently, they consulted with us on the questions that we were going to ask in an interview to our dementia-friendly community leads. We also, as I said, ran a workshop, and this was through Newcastle University with people affected and living with dementia. And we'll do a second one in summer when we'll actually talk about the findings of our research to see what they think is the most important part of what we found. We also have some dementia-friendly leads from Scotland. Because they couldn't be included in our research, we thought, great, we'll have them as involvement then. So they've been consulting with us again on providing feedback about the types of questions we should be asking, what's relevant, what could we perhaps leave out, because again, as researchers, we could get carried away and ask all sorts, so we'll just keep going with asking people in an interview otherwise. So they were good, really helpful for that. And then we did try and recruit through Parkinsons UK, because I mentioned earlier, some people with Parkinsons will also have dementia, and we were really keen to have that group involved, particularly because of my links with Parkinson's, and I've always enjoyed working with people with Parkinson's. And that recruitment is still in progress. We haven't had anyone yet, but that advert is still open. So we do hope to be able to maybe talk through some of the findings during summer, if we can find anyone that would be interested. And then we also have a person living with dementia who's providing ongoing support with the project. So again, I consulted with this person about how best to interview someone living with dementia. What things do I as a researcher need to consider? That may seem perhaps obvious, but it's really important that actually, particularly now that it's all online, that makes it so much more difficult. So perhaps splitting interviews across 2 sessions, what's too long for somebody, what information do they need in advance, and all those kind of things. So that's kind of shaped again how we will conduct our research. So some really nice examples of what we found so far of different projects going on within the community. So this isn't like a traditional perhaps science based research project where there's lots of data and numbers. It's far more qualitative, which is sort of embedded within interviews and looking at kind of the words of people. So and we're documenting all the different types of activities going on in the local area. So Stevenage has something called the Red Shed, which is a grassroots organisation providing gardening workshops for people living with dementia and their carers and families. And as you can, I hope you can see from the pictures, they have a piece of garden at the back of the school field with an actual shed as well. And the lady who runs it specialises in all sorts of all things garden. So she picks different seeds for different times of the year, and people can plant their seeds either within the garden or perhaps in a pot to take home. They take cuttings, they might help build something new for the garden if people suggest that that's something that they would like. They've also just invested in some garden games to do croquet and things like that out in the garden. And they also partner with the school to do some intergenerational work. So having the school children come into the garden when allowed. At the minute, that's unfortunately not possible. But so that's a really nice example of a dementia-specific activity. And then we have stepping out with carers. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of stepping out with carers, because they do run some things in Hertfordshire. So I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard of them, but these are an organisation that is dementia inclusive. So they're not specific to people living with dementia. And the main focus is on the carers and providing a break for people who are caring for someone with a long-time health condition. And that could be that might be dementia, but it also could be perhaps someone who has a disability, a physical disability, or it might be mental health issues or something like that. So a complete variety at that group. And they run walks across Hertfordshire using local, as the lady who I interviewed put it, beautiful places. So, and they're guided by what the people who attend the activities where they visit. So maybe the gardens of a stately home, or going to an area of outstanding natural beauty. So they don't just go for a walk maybe around like the local park, for example, which maybe would be not quite as pretty a view, but they specifically go to locations that are known to be very scenic and of interest to the group members. And again, they run in Hertfordshire and across Manchester as well. So they've got quite a few different locations. And then for Sheffield, we found a really nice example of cycling. And again, this is a dementia inclusive activity. So it's open to all. So perhaps people, again, with all sorts of disabilities. And they provide bikes such that you can hire them for booked sessions, but you can also rent them to take them home as well. So this is a really nice example of something quite different. We've not seen many examples of cycling across some of the other areas. So this is really good for us. And this has had to stop during COVID, obviously, but they're just starting to resume now. And in the meantime, in Sheffield, a lot of things have moved online. So online Tai Chi, yoga, dance fit, chair aerobics. So Sheffield's been a really good example of how they've been quite flexible and adapted to the pandemic to make sure things have been provided online. And then Middlesbrough, Ruth's seen these, I think, is not a case study site, but I thought was really interesting to mention because they've managed to continue running, as the lead calls it, disco afternoons. So it was very specific that they weren't dance classes because they're not led by a dance teacher, but more that they have a live singer or a DJ and you can dance along to the music as you wish. So there's no following a routine or anything like that. So I'm going to call it a disco afternoon. So they hold disco afternoons in Middlesbrough, and they've kept these going during lockdown, which for us makes a really interesting example, because when we've spoken to most of our communities, they've pretty much ceased all activity during lockdown. And this isn't to say that this is the best way forward for everybody, but it is a really nice example of talking to the local community and people living with dementia who felt quite strongly that they needed this group to continue during the pandemic, because it was their activity that they came out to every week, and to socialise with people. And as you can see, Brian, our DFC lead has made a very concerted effort to mark out all the spaces. So I'm not sure how aware of government guidelines people are, but you can have support groups of up to 15. So this is how he's managed to run these dance classes, is because there's less than 15 people each session. Everything is marked out, so everyone keeps 2 meters apart. He's bought separate tables for everybody, and these are all wiped down, and everything is COVID compliant. He's got the local public health team and council on board with this as a support group, and this has managed to stay running. And he's got some really good feedback through. So he's, again, this is a good example for us, because he's collected evaluation forms while he's been running it during the pandemic, asking people about how, whether they enjoyed the sessions, but also did they feel safe when they attended, so that if for any reason someone didn't, he could explore that. And if the majority of people saying they didn't, then he could do something about it, whether that be stopping the classes, or, you know, distancing people even further. So you see, there's not loads of people at the session, and I just want to reiterate, I'm not saying this is the best way forward for everyone, because not everyone would feel comfortable being inside perhaps, but for this particular group, it's a really nice example of him listening to the people within his community and continuing that, because they felt that that's been really valuable for them to be able to attend that activity during this time. So we've only got some preliminary findings, because we're still collecting a lot of data at the minute. But as I mentioned, to kind of the framing of the term physical activity is really important. So when we spoke to people, physical activity kind of seems synonymous with exercise, and people might not want to do exercise because exercise seems a bit off-putting. I think maybe people imagine someone pushing weights around a gym or something like that. So, and as I say, this is an example. So she going around Hobbycraft, someone's mother would walk for ages, and that is completely valid as a form of physical activity, but it's something you're enjoying what you're doing, because you're distracted by shopping. And we may need to think about the motivations behind physical activity. So someone said that they found their Fitbit. I don't know if anyone has a Fitbit here, whether they use one to track their steps or anything like that, but that might be helpful for some people. Or having a friend, again, if you're going out for a walk and you have a good old chat and a catch up, which I mean certainly I imagine is happening quite a lot at the minute, because everyone's not seen each other for so long, that's a good way of motivating yourself to be physically active. Transport and financial issues are really important when attending organised groups, which, as I mentioned stepping out with carers earlier. As part of their work, they always ensure that there is transport available to get people to the walks, because they know not everyone can necessarily drive themselves there, for example. So this is really important for us to consider. One of the main things that has come up in conversation is actually the lack of confidence people are now going to have after the pandemic. And I don't know if this resonates with anyone on the call, but actually having the confidence to get out and go and get going again. So there's been a lot of work by Age UK and the Alzheimer's Society looking at the deconditioning that has happened during the pandemic. So having lots of people sit at home and chilled perhaps means that people haven't actually been that active, and so they might find that their mobility has been quite impacted by that. And not only that, the concerns around leaving the house due to their mobility being impacted, and worries about falling, etc. And there's a quote here by one of our dementia project officers when we asked about what would the challenges be of coming out of the lockdown and people engaging in physical activity. And a lot of the time it's coming back to the same thing of making sure people feel safe when they do start to do physical activity again. So that's just a brief overview of what we've kind of found so far. And so how will this research help? Well, for dementia-friendly communities who don't provide any physical activities, so let's say, for example, Welling and Hatfield didn't have any specific activities for people living with dementia, our best practice guidelines and report will detail who to collaborate with and how. So the key organisations, such as perhaps the local leisure centre or maybe the Alzheimer's Society, to provide training for walk groups or something like that. How to include hard to reach groups. So we're also thinking about perhaps people with early onset dementia and the considerations needed around that, and what resources are needed to run activities. So this isn't just a focus on the funding, but also human resources. So how many paid staff might you need? Do you need access to volunteers? How many? Part-time, full-time? And then also things like which activities have people managed to get a room venue for hire or for free? So thinking about all those different things. And then also, most importantly, involving people living with dementia in decision making and evaluation. So what are the best practice examples of doing this? So this will really help communities that aren't doing these things currently. But it will also help physical activity providers. So perhaps they want to include a hard to reach group. How should they do that? What resources might they need? How do they involve people living with dementia in decision making? So it's not just the dementia friendly communities that will benefit from this work. And the resource that details all the different types of physical activities going on will benefit local healthcare providers, as well as people living with dementia and their family supporters, so that they know what's going on in the local area. We hope to develop that resource in partnership with people living with dementia and all our different patient public involvement groups. So I don't know how long I've actually spent talking. I've just carried on. But thank you so much for listening. As I say, we're kind of midway through the project at the minute, so we're doing a lot of data collection, so I don't have a lot to tell you in terms of findings. But thank you so much for listening and for having me present. And my email's on the screen if anyone ever wants to get in contact with me about anything to do with the research. But I hope that was interesting for everybody. And perhaps if anyone is interested in the research, perhaps when we have the whole lot of findings, I can actually come back and tell you about those.
That's great, Becki. And if we can unshare your screen,
yeah,
then we can ask for some questions. If anybody wants any questions, let's have a look. There we go, gallery. Any questions for anybody? From anybody for Becki? No? Anyone? Jane? There's a hand. Can I ask a question then? Just
yeah.
Are you going to find it difficult to incorporate people with Parkinson's, people with MS, people with motor neuron disease, all these other people together into one kind of activity, do you think?
Do you mean for the physical activity providers or for us in terms of the research?
For practical purposes, I think.
Yeah, so there seems to be a lot of good examples of organisations being able to do this. Mm-hmm. So as part of our case study work, that's what we will be considering. So is it necessary all the time to perhaps siphon people off into their own group? I'm just thinking in terms of Dance for Parkinson's, there's definite value in having it just as dance for Parkinson's. That's not necessary for all groups, and so there might be specific benefits to having it being lots of different people with all sorts of long-term health conditions. So part of the research will be looking about what's the added value, or what's the difference in the value of attending those different types of groups.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone with a question?
Do you think that the most beneficial activities for people with Parkinson's or dementia are things like dance or table tennis, which involve activities that are personal, or more unconventional or more Eastern things like yoga and Tai Chi? Do you have an opinion as to which is more beneficial, or does it depend on the person?
Oh, that's a tricky question. So I think, again, like you say, it will depend on the person. I definitely think it depends in what you want to achieve from the activity in itself. So if you're thinking about just the mobility and the physical benefits, then perhaps doing something very aerobic might be useful for that. But if you've not got the social aspect, then perhaps you might gain more from doing something that is kind of a combination of the two. So doing something as part of a group that is also aerobic. Lots of people find yoga useful because of the mindfulness and the meditative aspect of it. And that might be helpful for things like relaxation, perhaps even tremor might be useful. So it really does depend on what you want from the physical activity. And I think as researchers still, we don't know kind of what the perfect, or what even the right amount of doing something is to achieve a particular effect, if that makes sense. That's still very much being looked at in the research as to what is best for what, before people can start expecting specific benefits from something. But I think having a social component, I imagine quite a lot of people here have attended something kind of like physical that's got that social component and feel a value in that aspect of it.
Yeah, pre-lockdown, I played for a table tennis club, and it was very beneficial. I found that a body which was seizing up just suddenly started to move when I got a bat in my hand and a person across the net. So yeah, I totally go along with that. Yeah.
I think with this is why we were really keen to have people with Parkinson's involved in the research, or to look at the difference between Parkinson's with dementia and just dementia, because Parkinson's has a slightly different element to it because of the motor aspect, which people living with dementia might not necessarily have. And so people with Parkinson's perhaps may find different physical benefits, whereas I think with the dementia research, we're finding it's possibly perhaps less about the physical and more about, as we said in the title of the project, more about the social connection and the actual well-being, and allowing people with dementia to feel part of their community rather than having to just be part of a dementia specific group. I'm trying to think of an example. So when we put out our advert for recruiting people with Parkinson's and dementia to be involved in the research, I had an email that said even if I had dementia, I don't think I would be that would be an appropriate thing to be part of your, to be involved in your research. I wouldn't be able to contribute. And so that really highlights still that sort of perception that we all have, and we need to work harder as researchers to make sure that people living with dementia feel valued and feel that they are able to take part and do have a voice that is useful within research, because just because you have dementia doesn't necessarily mean you don't have useful or important things that are valuable to research. So, and when we're doing research about people, we absolutely need to consult with them about what's important to them. So yeah, I think it's definitely come out that I think it will become clear that with Parkinson's, there might be a little bit of a different benefit from physical activity, perhaps. So it'll be interesting exploring that more through the research. That's probably not answered your question. It's been a bit of a ramble.
It's given me a lot of, no, I think it's given me a lot of insight. I mean, that is a important thing, the distinction between the two and the different requirements. I mean, I certainly have always found, because I used to do voluntary work with people with different needs, and probably the single most important thing that I found was accepting taking the person exactly as they are, rolling with the way someone is, not because I think people feel they fit in if the people around them accept them, and I think that's a lot of the problem with a lot of things. People are not allowed to be as they are. Say someone with dementia asks the questions more times, the same question several times. People have got to not turn away from them. And so I think educating the wider world, and then people will fit in more easily. That's just a thought.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
Anybody else with a question? Anyone?
Well, it's not so much just question, Ruth, as I think Frank, as you know, takes part in a lot of the things online. There are different types. The Well in Hatfield group run more of an aerobics, a keep fit session, which Frank finds far easier because it's continual repetition of each move for a short period of time. But then again, with Ready Steady Move, which was Dance for Parkinsons, they have a session of singing and using their vocal cords. But that not only helps Parkinson's people, it is helping Frank from the cognitive impairment side. So he's the memory of the tunes and the music done on a weekly basis. It's not the same tunes every week, but they do keep coming up. And I think that helps, doesn't it? Yeah. I think he finds that very helpful. And of course, with Parkinson's, the loss of the voice, it goes low. And that is pushing that along with the cognitive side,
Sort of a dual one then.
Yeah, it is.
I agree, Gillian. Yeah, Phil really enjoys it as well.
Hi, Phil. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. We have votes for things that we do. Any other questions or comments or anything really?
Can I put in, Ruth? May I make a comment, please?
Yes, of course.
I'm sorry we didn't get online till half an hour after you'd started. By the time we got June's mother to bed and things like that. So we missed the first half hour of Becki, what sounded like an interesting talk. Yeah, I'll watch the recording. Did you mention anything about the different aspects of Parkinson's dementia, Becki? Because up here on the Northeast News, we're Northeast at the moment, and there was a chap called Terry Steele who was on the radio a lot, on the television a lot in his younger days. And he is in respite now, or not respite, he's on his last legs, so to speak. And his son is looking after him. And he has Parkinson's disease. He has Lewy body disease.
Oh, gosh.
And he also has Alzheimer's. How do you distinguish between all of these types of dementia? And there is also, I understand, Parkinson's dementia.
That is very tricky. So I'm by no means a clinician in any sense. So they would be the best place to obviously distinguish between those things. But if Alzheimer's has some particular aspects to the way it kind of develops that might allow you to distinguish that from, say, perhaps dementia. although dementia is kind of an umbrella term, but you might have, for example, vascular dementia or frontotemporal dementia. So there might be some sort of milestones perhaps that they will use, or markers to distinguish between. But I imagine it's quite difficult, particularly when you have that number of diagnoses. that's a complex case there. I would think that would take a lot to distinguish between those. But it might be that someone developed their dementia prior to their Parkinson's, or the Parkinson's prior to their dementia. That makes it a little bit easier to distinguish. But yeah, I didn't put anything in about how the differences between the different dementias, but for us as the research project, that's probably kind of an aside, if anything, because though we do obviously want to include people living with dementia in the project, and that's sort of the focus, we're not so interested necessarily in their diagnosis as such. As I say, it's less of a, I imagine, sort of more stereotypical science bit of research, because it could be quite stressful to ask people about their diagnosis as well. So we aren't particularly going to explore that necessarily in the research, but I'm more than happy to forward on any kind of information or have some other chats about dementia if anyone ever wanted that.
Well, we're living with June's mother at the moment, caring for her, and she has dementia. And it's quite interesting in many ways how to deal with it, because the way she repeats things, the way she loses things, the way she forgets things. She doesn't recognize me sometimes. How long have you been married to June? Are you married? Why are you sleeping together? Do I stay here tonight? All of these strange questions. And I found that the best way so far, and looking on the internet a lot, is just go along with it. What do you think, Becki?
It can be quite unnecessarily distressing to take someone out of that time period, or that thought that they're in. So say, for example, someone, I'm trying to think of an example that we've had recently, but if someone believes themselves to be in like a particular environment, unless it's of like danger to them, sometimes it can be quite upsetting to correct that necessarily. So sometimes it is it's better in a sense, perhaps, to go along with it, unless, like, as I say, unless there's a particular reason that really shouldn't happen, so that there might be some safeguarding or an issue, health and safety risk around that. But I think Jane was nodding along there.
Yeah, that's the because Phil's Parkinson's and dementia, and that's the training I've had. Yes, been taught, go along with it. Don't try and contradict or argue or anything. Go along with it, like you're saying, unless obviously it's something really unsafe or something. Yeah.
Right, I'm going to wind things up now. So it's recording if you want to listen to it again. Becky's always available to talk to, aren't you, Becki?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Becky's very friendly, and she's lovely, and we love her to pieces. So I'm going to say thank you very much, Becki. You've been an absolute star. You really have.
It's so lovely seeing everyone. It's so nice to see. I've not seen June and Graham since I can't remember, so it's so lovely to see you.
Well,
and Jane and Phil.
Soon we'll be able to have tea on the lawn or something again, won't we? So thank you very much, and thank you all for being here and supporting it. So
yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you all for organising it.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Nice to see you all.